hello, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, my incomprehensible, stupid brain has now finally figured out how to work OBS for the third week in a row. Hopefully, I will be a little bit more organized this week as far as switching from topic to topic, but as these things go with me, no guarantees, of course. For those of you who this may be your first time here, my name is Daniel, and I have basically gained at least a small amount of notoriety within the wrestling community for my what I call infamous 7-page document, which kind of just is not very deep really just kind of I guess organizes and puts together some of the problems that I have seen at least throughout um, throughout wrestling as a whole, and I think that that was kind of the first time that somebody actually organized it and put it all in one place, where it made it a lot easier to kind of digest all the information. We'll go over parts of the document today. I try not to dwell too heavily on the documents because I think that doing that makes it very dry and boring. We do have some huge news to talk about. I do still update that document quite a bit from day to day. We have some huge news today coming out of the Western District of Texas, the federal court. As you may have known, if you guys have seen the document at all, you will be well aware of the fact that currently Flow is kind of stuck in a legal battle with a company called Sito Mobile. That's Sito Mobile, and they have sued Flow Sports for patent infringement, and kind of, especially in patent infringement, in the sense that how, to my very basic understanding, how kind of the information is wired. Cito believes that that is patented under. Oh, here we go. Here goes the frame drop. Yeah. Cito believes that it is under their patent that they got around 2015. So finally, as I said in the document before, until I updated it about this morning, was that Flow had not yet responded, which was inherently, I think, a big problem. And the big problem is that Flow had already had their deadline reset one or two times, and they realized the judge, in this case, overseeing the case is a federal judge, Alan D. Albright, who was appointed by none other than Mr. Donald John Trump, the most intriguing political figure in the modern age. But that's beside the point. They realized, I think, this is just speculation, of course, as is much of this show, that the federal judge was no longer going to grant them too much longer of an extension, and therefore, of course, in typical Flow fashion, when you fight them, they fight back twice as hard. They filed a counterclaim in federal court yesterday, federal district court. They filed a counterclaim against Cito Mobile, which we do not have that document just yet. There's a delay from coming out of Pacer before we can access it in the public domain. I do have, however, the 25-page original complaint filed in district court. It took me until about 2:30 a.m. yesterday morning to figure that out, where to find it after scouring many, many legal websites that I never would have ever thought that I would be on, but we will go over that together. that seems to be enough depressing news for the moment. We'll switch over to some more exciting news, and that is, of course, if you haven't heard already yet, this flyer up here, the Wrestling Underground announced by Mr. Chael Sonnen. We have some wonderful uh, matchups here. Kevin Gadsden against Nick Gwiazdowski. Mark Hall versus Tom versus Gant. Darren Wynn versus none other than Colin Moore. Sammy Brooks versus Shakir Rashid. Oh yes, another Penn State Iowa death match. Uh, and Tyler Berger versus Joey McKenna. Tyler Berger is, I think, one of the most underrated college wrestlers within the past decade. I think that happens quite a bit, is that when you have a very, very dominant figure at somebody's weight class, that doesn't mean the rest of the weight class is complete garbage. It's just rather that they often get overlooked when it comes to talking about. Oh, give me 1 second, as of course my technical abilities are rather weak. But yes, I think Tyler Berger, if Jason Nolf did not exist, he would be a national champion. I think, as would a lot of other people, but you get the point. But of course, the reason why I pulled this up, this is going to be on the 30th of August, so only 2 weeks away, at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, this is, I almost feel like Chael has kind of been secretly listening to myself and Mr. Pat Minio. There are a couple theories that I have here. One is that maybe the best case scenario is that Flo's cards, Flo and kind of the Rumble on the rooftop went rather well, and therefore Chael wants to get in on this. I think this was probably planned even before the Flo card happened. The one thing I am a little bit perplexed by is why the announcement came down maybe a week ago, and it's going to be interesting to see how they market this, if at all, to the people. The good news is, of course, I think something that I've always talked about is exposing the content to people that are not aware of wrestling, so to speak, as a sport, because I think on national television and kind of um, on national television, it's kind of not readily accessible, let's just say. Of course, Big Ten, I think, has really ramped it up over the past couple of years to good reason, but other than that, the choices are rather sparse as far as on cable TV, and for good reason. As I mentioned last week, the 2019 NCAA championship, which was which was the last one held, obviously, because the 2021 was canceled due to the coronavirus pandemic. The Nielsen ratings, although okay and actually pretty high, highest that they've been in a while, the actual viewership number, which I think is most important to deal with growth and kind of health of the sport, hit a low in the past, for the lowest it's been for the past 7 years. God help me today, I cannot speak English. But other than that, the question is, like, there is obviously a much bigger subscriber base that UFC Fight Pass has been able to kind of accumulate over time, and they've been around for quite a while now as well. And it'll be interesting to see how many people just kind of stumble on it on accident and just kind of like it and get into it and see that um, the and see how many people stick around, because the more exposure, if they're never exposed, you have no chance of retaining them for future events. One thing that's very interesting to me is that they made no attempt to I don't know if an attempt was made and they turned it down, but something that may be more interesting is getting more than one. I think Darren Wynn, if I'm not mistaken, my pop culture is very limited as far as kind of where everybody's at nowadays. But to get a couple MMA fighters on, a couple more really, even outside of the UFC would have been very intriguing because let's be honest, the majority of UFC Fight Pass's base is a MMA base. Now this is interesting. This is kind of the first big uh, competition, I would say. The Rumble on the Rooftops certainly was one, but I think this one will definitely give Flow a run for its money. Now, what's very interesting is Flow has been deathly quiet on the fact that this event is even going on, which I think is rather sad because they do have the largest wrestling base, and I think this ultimately goes back to kind of the cultural issues that we see at Flow, and it's the idea that it's rather that the sport, I think, with additional growth will in the long run benefit Flow more than kind of this, let's just put it politically correct, kind of this grudge match style. If it's not my event, I'm not even going to acknowledge its existence. Instead, I'm going to post as much as I possibly want about Jake Paul, but Jake and Logan Paul, and go from there. I think that's rather short and arrogant of them. But that is enough for that. I'll kind of talk more about marketing strategies later in the show if we have some more time. But in the meantime, I might as well get all the good news out of the way first, and then we will get into the much more dicey, much more interesting pieces of information. Alrighty here. Uh, okay, a little announcement from me. It's that, ooh, good Lord have mercy. Good Lord have mercy. Give me one moment to top-notch quality production here as I try and recenter this. Yep, top-notch quality production right here. I literally, again, it is beyond me how sometimes I started the show without barely even knowing how to operate a computer within a normal person's capacity. So, this is like this is like when a 4-year-old tries to operate a computer for the first time. Like it's not supposed to go well, and it really doesn't, but lovely, we have done that now. Lovely, 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 lovely. All right, so as I've talked about on Twitter quite a bit, that I think the best way to kind of sustain Division One wrestling throughout this tough time and kind of uh, get them through this coronavirus pandemic, because as the news has continued to fall down that fall sports, I don't think anybody would have ever thought, one, that the 2020 NCAA championships were going to go without effect, because and we did have fans for the majority of the conference championships in 2019, and it was hard to believe that just 2 weeks later, kind of the bright line would be hit and the whole world would kind of fall off a cliff. But however, I think as we know, I don't think it really matters if, as far as from a financial perspective, obviously from a moral and psychological perspective for the athletes, I am 100% behind having a full season, whether that be without fans or with fans or whatever restrictions. I think there are many, many college wrestlers in this country that certainly deserve a chance to compete again. I got into a nasty Twitter back and forth with somebody from obviously something I wanted to show last week, but through the chaos and disorganization I missed. And Grant Leaf of Missouri, a good friend of mine. Well, not good friend of mine, but let's just put it that he has been so gracious. I've interviewed him before, and we all know, if you watched the show, the debacle that was that episode and how I butchered my technology abilities. But he basically tweeted out that obviously he had had so many injuries, and just I could understand his frustration, and I think that's where we need to be very careful before canceling just abruptly the season. Is that these are people, these are what they do for a living, almost in a way, although they don't get paid. But this is a huge part of their lives, and we need to take that into consideration before we just take it away. Um, but back to the point, it was that we need to make sure these programs can stay here, because I think Stanford was a big wake up call to the community that no program is safe, and you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. You don't know the lines and the kind of bottom line for these colleges. So what I've decided to do is I am kind of a noob stock trader. I'm not afraid to admit that sometimes I don't know what I am doing, but I'm a huge fan of investing in stocks, and I think it's fun to kind of play around. I will be donating my profits from the current from now until Thanksgiving, so that gives me about 3.5 months time to try and make as much money as I can. Uh, and I will donate it to one program based on you guys' choice. So you guys tell me the program. You guys explain to me why your favorite team is the best team in the country, why they deserve the money. And just as a safeguard, in case I lose money, which I may possibly do, today the markets weren't great, and I was nervously pacing in front of my telecommunications device, aka my cell phone, that is a dinosaur from 1984, because the markets were not having a good day right before I came on here. But minimum $200. So what I'll do is I'll take that $200, go to that team store, buy all the merch I can with $200. I will raffle it out. I will put the link to the giveaway below after I am done streaming, and if you're interested in possibly getting some free gear, just enter and nominate a program. And I have a small following. That's fine. That's fun. That just makes these giveaways so much easier. If there's less people entered, you have a higher chance of winning. That should be quite fun. All right, enough of me babbling on about random stuff. Let's go ahead and talk about the clear topic that I had outlined here. So last week, of course, we talked about kind of how the problems in the financial structure and the way that our governing body has ceded control over to a de facto media company that has basically become the governing body caused a lot of problems. and why it's bad. So we'll specifically look at how bad exactly is the problem. That's the answer that's the question we're trying to answer today is let's take stock of what we have. And the answer to that question is quite simply that it has become rather terrible. Um, so we have pulled up the almighty famous document at this point. Um, the document here, so today was really portions B and C, where we'll talk about the new Division One wrestling programs that are added. There are 6 here on this list: Arizona State, California Baptist, Long Island, Fresno State Presbyterian, and Little Rock. So, first of all, Arizona State was discontinued in 2008. 2 weeks later, they were brought back, and basically the donors, private donors, and alumni saved the program. That is similar to what Stanford is trying to do now. But unfortunately, this is kind of what illustrates my point is that the problem is even worse than what we see on this paper because Arizona State's program is really not new. And without the backing of public donors, this program would cease to exist. And that is inherently the problem is that when you are not self-sustainable financially and you are, and I promise you, and it's not to be pessimistic, but uh, if you if you seriously, I mean, there will be a day, whether it just be the alumni just, turning over and no longer supporting the program, or, a massive problem like coronavirus. We don't know the numbers behind the scenes and whether they'll have enough money to continue for a couple years to come. We'll see if the private donors are still willing to continue to fund the program even in a time of crisis. Um, so I know eventually down the line, 20, 30 years, if there is no change, and this is the key factor here, if there is no change in the way that the sport is being marketed, then well, I see this program being in deep, deep trouble because there will eventually come a day where the public donors, private donors just aren't going to cut it anymore. There are also other programs that aren't even on this list that are also backed only by private donors. Let me get this straight. There's nothing wrong with being solely backed by private donors for the university itself, and I think it very good programs for creates very good programs for very many athletes. However, in the long term, if many of your programs are supported by only private donors, that becomes a problem because over time, athletic directors will just get sick of it, and your program will go. Another little nugget to point out here is that the majority of these 6 programs are at very small mid-tier schools, which means that the hegemonic Power 5 schools seem not to be interested at all since since 2013 there has not been a single addition not 2013, sorry, since 2006, there has not been a single addition. Remember, if you weren't here last week, remember all of my data is pulled from the academic year beginning of 2006, and all my financial information is pulled from the beginning of 2007. That's the first full year of existence from Flow Sports. Alrighty then. Moving on, so we'll see that the growth and kind of investment opportunity is quite low, and I think what makes this most concerning is that if you had like let's say 20 added programs and 30 drop programs, that is almost better because that means that the athletic directors are kind of split down the middle as to how is wrestling investable as a sport. As I said last week, and I'll say this again, and you'll probably make me harp on this, you'll probably hear me harp on this many times throughout the series, it's that the problem is that you want to think of the athletic directors as having all these stocks as options, and the sports and the different sports are stocks, and each uh, school, depending on their funding and their endowment programs and their how much their budget is that they have been given to, but the athletic director has been given to by the president, um, they can only invest in a certain number of sports. And if you had like 20 added programs and 30 drop programs, that seems to prove that at least we're somehow split down the middle as to whether it's investable. You have portions of the country maybe that wrestling is booming and other portions of the country that's not. But when you only have six and really five, as I explained the Arizona State situation, five new programs over the past 13, give or take, years for a Division One college sport. I mean, that is really, really, really sad, and that seems to me that these five schools that have started a program seem to be an outlier rather than part of the consensus. All right. Now on to, of course, much more depressing news, and this list is much longer than the first list. It's drop programs, so long, in fact, that I split it into three subsections. It's the dropped programs, Division One programs, since 2007. Of course, that's James Madison, Eastern Illinois, Oregon, Wagner, Portland State, Delaware State, UC Davis, Duquesne, UNC Greensboro, Liberty, Cal State Fullerton, Grand Canyon, Boise State, Eastern Michigan, Old Dominion, and Stanford. And first of all, one that I would like to point out is on this list, of course, is Boise State, which had cut their wrestling program, which was somewhat successful in the grand scheme of things. Obviously, not on the caliber of, I would say, the Big Ten or even the ACC Big 12, but for the grand scheme of things, for a school in the state and the great potato state of Idaho, I have no idea why I just said it like that. Oh God, this is live too. But that's the beauty of live streaming. Boise State obviously cut, I think, if I remember correctly, they cut their wrestling program to invest in a baseball program. Obviously, that failed because the baseball program, after just a couple of seasons, and I think they only played like 20 games or something, uh, was cut itself. But that does make it seem that it was so sad that not only did they cut an investment, they basically sold their stock from one company, and that's kind of like you sell if you're a Facebook investor and you sell all of your Facebook stock and then you go invest it all in Twitter and then Twitter goes bankrupt. That's basically kind of what happened to Boise State. Now it's kind of sad that now both programs don't exist because now you have no money in Facebook, and Facebook, has no investors now, and Twitter is bankrupt. Obviously, neither of those companies are going bankrupt anytime soon. But just as an example, that inherently is quite sad and should prove as a wake up call to the rest of the wrestling community that athletic directors find the news so depressing that they are willing to take investment out of wrestling, punt it to another sport, and even if that investment massively fails, they're not bringing back their wrestling team, which means that they think that even though they made a mistake when investing in baseball, because I just think that the regional area and kind of nobody wants to go play baseball in Idaho of all places. Um, I think culturally it's just not as ingrained as maybe down here in the South, but that's just my opinion as to why the Boise State program failed. Um, but that's probably the scariest one out of all of them. Stanford also should frighten people quite a bit. The fact that, again, also Old Dominion, their wrestling gym is being, uh, let's say, transformed into a volleyball gym. Jason Bryant, which I'll talk more about later, has posted a picture of the new volleyball team posing for pictures in what was once the wrestling gym. So again, that's another example of investing the money that should be going into wrestling programs into other sports because of the bleak outlook of the sport. We will talk more about how the bleak outlook what that bleak outlook specifically looks like in a later episode. Um, but I want to specifically outline the Eastern Michigan. I don't want to say scandal, but let's put it that way. That the Eastern Michigan program and kind of how it was cut. There was basically an error on the books, but the financial aid basically said an independent financial study. I'll scroll down to it so you can read it. Hold on. Yep. Nope. Lovely. Okay. So with the elimination of these sports programs, EMU cut a few sports. Is that EMU would actually lose $60,000 a year. This is what is very, very sad and is very concerning. And that I'm sure the athletic director saw these numbers and saw the report, and if he hasn't, he definitely has now if he didn't see it at the time. Um, the fact is that I think a lot of these athletic directors kind of look at these programs as is there long-term sustainability to making the university money, and they don't mind taking a slight cut in tuition money, even losing the university some money if they don't think that the program can thrive long term and bring the program both financial and championship success. And I think that ultimately is even more scary than um, some of the other programs that I've outlined. Uh, Enough kind of transitioning back to current events, and I'll try and keep this somewhat short today. I know last time I went to about over an hour. I'll try and keep this relatively nice and short. Obviously, we still know that the coronavirus pandemic is happening, and we have news that the EIWA unfortunately has decided to push back its wrestling season until January 1st. Oh, hey, look, there's none other than Mr. Brandon Paetzel, who thankfully is finally getting some press coverage without him getting taken down. Yes, that is a shot at the one and only Flow Wrestling. Um, let me just put it this way. I think that, of course, many other conferences will unfortunately follow uh, the EIWA's lead. Something that to keep an eye on is they are in the northeast corner, and despite most of the EIWA schools are in the northeast corner, and despite a, let's say, recent outbreak, and where I live down south and in the southeast of the states of Florida and Georgia, largely the most heavily impacted area is still the northeast corner. The statistics show it. I'm not making this stuff up. So that probably, hopefully, will be a reason for other conferences to kind of hold back on what is happening. Um, so again, I have said from the very beginning, and I will maintain the fact that I don't think it really matters if we have a season as far as for the long term sustainability of the sport. I think we're in a bad place either way. It's kind of pick your poison as to which evil is worse. Um, I think that either way, whether we're not financially self-sustainable right now, and whether we have a season or not, we'll continue to go in the hole because most of the fixed costs of maintaining a program, such as scholarship money that's given out to these athletes, are still going to happen. These kids, even if they don't have a wrestling season, these college students, they're still students. Hence the term student athletes. Absolutely abhor that term, but it is what it is. So hopefully the EIWA can get it together, and my man Brandon Paetzel can have a wonderful senior season. Flash this picture one more time. All right. Now, Twitter beef. Twitter beef. So I basically tweeted out in response to Jason Bryan's in response to Jason Bryan's tweet, when he tweeted out that let's see if we can get this on here. All right, let's see. Lovely. Yeah, he tweeted out these pictures of what was once the wrestling gym that is now, unfortunately, a volleyball shoot place, apparently. Um, so I tweeted out, obviously, statistics that we'll get into later in an episode, but that's true. The way I kind of got to this number is I basically simply took the number of programs in 2006, made a percent change, um, made a percent change to the number of programs now. The 2018 to 2019 season, women's volleyball had a growth of 6.7%. Wrestling, of course, as I've mentioned before, has a negative 14.77% growth, which is no growth at all. It's called a decline. But we make it sound better than it is by calling it a negative growth. That's rather sad, of course, and I thought that people would know and should know. And he responded that basically my numbers were correct. That, well, they were correct, but of course, I think the percent sponsorship was probably the, you know, statistic that I should have looked at um, more. Since I should have looked at that more, but of course I did my data at like 1 in the morning, was not thinking straight. I was just like, just throw these numbers into a calculator and see what happens. He basically tweeted back here, you could read the tweet yourself, that sponsorship in 2006 is 26.9%, now 21.37% women's volleyball from 95.72% down slightly to 95.16%. Now, this, which is why I responded, doesn't that make it worse, right? If you think about it, it is so much harder. If you're already 95% of the way there, it's a lot harder to go from 95, just like it's a lot harder to go from, it's a lot harder to go from 6% unemployment rate to 3% unemployment rate, much easier to go down from 9 to 6 because there will always be kind of, I don't know how to explain it in English, I know in Chinese, but that doesn't help me very much here. There is a, let's say, margin of error is not right. It's just as you get lower on the curve, or in this case, higher on the curve when higher is better, in my unemployment example, lower is better, it makes it much more difficult to sustain. Just like year over year growth, it's much easier to go from to double your sales from 125 to 250 than it is to go from 250 to half a million. So this inherently brings out the problem is wrestling didn't have many programs to begin with and has only gotten worse while other sports such as volleyball have been able to sustain their growth even at a ridiculous number of programs. And we go back and forth here and he brings up the point that at all other divisions, including women's, NAIA Division 2 and Division 3, the numbers are wonderful. The numbers are good. The numbers seem to suggest that there's some kind of growth. And many people have brought that up as a point against much of what I have said. There are three kind of responses that I have to this. One, I think much of the growth at the Division 2 and Division 3 level, also the NAIA, and I believe there's another one, NJCAA, something like that. Bunch of letters, they're just alphabet soup acronyms. That is, I think, directly a byproduct of D1 wrestling falling is that when the D1 wrestling market continues to shrink and decline, there are obviously much smaller schools that obviously seek a need for little children, see a kind of a hole in the market, and the market needs somebody to fill that void, and a lot of mid-tier Division 2 and Division 3 programs do just that. He talks about, I said that, but I can't imagine that it's any high schooler's dream to wrestle for a D2 or D3 program. Certainly there is an argument to be made that the growth at the D2, D3 level is because of the decline at the D1 level. I stand by that. It's not to undercut D2 or D3 programs. We have a lot of very, very strong D2 and D3 programs. One that comes to mind is none other than Nebraska Kearney, who I believe wrestles at like Cliff Keen every year, and they actually do quite well, take out a few ranked people every year, Division 1 ranked wrestlers, but ultimately, I mean, it does not make sense why we think that why it's an excuse not to see that Division 1 wrestling is failing massively at the, premier institutions that we all grew up wanting to go to. I refuse to believe, and if I'm wrong, I'm so sorry, but I refuse to believe that you grow up and going to, elementary and middle school wanting to go to the University of Nebraska Kearney. And, that's certainly not the majority of people. I don't think so. And so, of course, they probably wouldn't mind once they get there, and I'm sure a lot of people would love that campus, and I'm sure that campus is lovely. But is that the only option that's going to be left for the next generation when we come around? I think that inherently is the problem. that we are facing right now. All right, enough of this Twitter battle, and also quick news flash, just 20-30 seconds. Flow Wrestling, get Grammarly, it's free. Probably should even get Grammarly Premium. Yeah, if you have that much investor money, it's not that much. Trust me, subscription's like what, $9.99 a month or something? Yeah, think you can spare $9.99 out of your $47.2 million of investor money. All right. Now on to the pretty, very juicy stuff that you all came here for. It is this document that I found on the deep embers of the internet last night at around 4 in the morning. This is the official complaint. Obviously, this is the action, and we go to some very boring stuff. Something that caught my eye very, very quickly. If you'll give me a moment to find it. Yes, very good. Flow Sports offers a subscription-based streaming service that provides on-demand and live video programming over the internet on information and belief. Flow Sports currently has over 300,000 active users, so that gives us a much better gauge as to kind of how much Flow Sports, how much revenue is making, which seems to suggest that it is kind of more on the conservative side of 21.53 million. If you watched the last video, you'll remember that I talked about how these independent third-party contractors such as Dun and Bradstreet basically look at how well they are doing, how well these companies are doing through models. 300,000, I was expecting a number a little bit higher than that. I think that's just something to point out. So now, this is where things get very, very interesting and where I get very, very lost. Oh, look, there's a Flow. So obviously, they spent money on a Flow Pro subscription to get that screenshot. Also, I should point out that the same company has sued Hulu for the same reason, and Hulu is yet to respond, and their deadline is also coming up in a couple of days. So here we talk about how they got the patent in 2015 to a guy named Charles A. Jennings. They specifically talk about what is happening, and this is all a bunch of legal stuff. Now, what's super interesting is at the end, when they look for damages, right? Because I don't understand any of this stuff. If we've got any patent lawyers or whatever, or tech geniuses, which obviously I am not one, as this stream proves. Seeto has been damaged by direct infringement of Flow Sports and is suffering and will continue to suffer irreparable harm and damages as a result of this infringement. All right, and then we go all the way down to the bottom. Prayer for relief. This is where things get very, very messy and very, very confusing. Seeto respectfully requests that this court, the U.S. Western District Court, to enter judgment in Seeto's favor and against Flow Sports as follows. A. Finding that Flow Sport directly infringes one or more claims each of the patents in suit. Duh. B. Awarding Seeto damages under 35 U.S.C. otherwise permitted by law. including supplemental damages for any continued post-verdict infringement. C. Awarding CEDO prejudgment and post-judgment interest on the damages awarding costs. D. Awarding costs of action, including all disbursements and attorney fees pursuant to the same section or as otherwise permitted by law, and awarding other costs for the relief the court determines to be just and equitable. Nowhere in there is there a number, which is very, very confusing and makes this lawsuit, I think, first of all, undercuts its credibility, which will make it interesting, and two, makes it in the air as to how much Flow could possibly damage. This probably will be settled out of court, as many issues are nowadays, but we shall see. But I think the overall point still stands that Flow, I think, is embroiled too much into legal controversy and makes it very, very difficult for the sport to grow, as I have outlined earlier, that kind of these programs and these athletic directors don't see any incentive, and you see just how bad it is. They are taking wrestling's money, investing it into other sports as a direct result of things like this. Of instead of focusing on marketing, instead of focusing on things that could overall push the sport, and anything wrestling, any former NCAA wrestlers that they covered, like Tyler Berger's on this new card. And all of a sudden I'm blanking, I can't remember. It's another goddamn name on that card. Nick Gwiazdowski, I think, right? He's on the card? Yep. Smart me. I'm very, very smart. Whew. Whew. There we go, yes. Colin Moore, Mark Hall, Kyron Gadsden. Yes. Sammy Brooks, and Shakur Rashid as well. All right, lovely. I think those are the things that we need to be focused on right now. Like, we are entering a time of crisis and a very important 3 to 5 years for the long-term sustainability of wrestling. And that ultimately is the point, is that we are not doing so well right now. I hope that my numbers have proved that over and over and over again, and I hope that you will come back and join me for episode 3. I hope you'll come back and join me for episode 3 as we talk about social media and the power of that as a tool to market properly. And how Flow Sports as a whole heavily relies on specifically Flow Wrestling's social media as a huge part of their business, and subversely how I think the wrestling community is being taken advantage of that just because of that. Let's see how big I pop up here. Yeah, so hopefully you'll join me back here, same time, same place, next Tuesday. Next Tuesday, 4 p.m., and I will try to come on time, but my technology brain is severely handicapped. In the meantime, if you did enjoy this show, subscribing to the YouTube is nice, and one last quick little plug here is of course my giveaway and raffle. Go ahead and nominate programs. Obviously, no rush. This giveaway will be happening for about 3 months as I try and make as much money as I can on Robinhood. And also, just common sense, if you have a couple of extra dollars that I know times are tough and our economy compared to pre-coronavirus numbers logically is not doing quite as well. If you do have a couple extra dollars, it's quite possible that I would ask you to consider, especially to many of the mid-tier Division One programs that are, without a doubt, certainly struggling, and especially MAC programs with the cancellation of MAC football. I would enjoy, I would strongly consider just buying a shirt. I think that goes a long way, a much longer way than you think it does. Um, and certainly your couple of dollars gives a much higher impact to the wrestling team than if you were to invest through a third party medium such as Flow or Track or whatever else. I don't even know what else is out there. One last shout out, enter the giveaway, come back Tuesday, same time, same place. Same time, same place next Tuesday to talk about the power and double-edged sword of social media for Flow. In the meantime, go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you so wish. Also, follow the Twitter DSHI12. That's DSHI12 if you want to follow more day to day. I will also put the link to the document that I used today. There will be updates, and those updates will be in various colors. Thank you so much for watching, and enjoy the rest of your evening. And I hope that enjoy wrestling and have a good one.